Welcome to another edition of Wagon Wheel on Spotify Green Room, if you're listening there, on the Red Inca podcast, or YouTube, or I don't know, maybe if you're just in my room at the moment, wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching. Welcome. Just a quick shout out to Manscaped. You can get 20% off free worldwide shipping if you want to shave your balls in a safer way. Manscaped is brilliant. Could not be happier with the product. So thank you to them. Thanks to Bodyline T-shirts as well for sending me some T-shirts. And a big thank you to everyone on Patreon. Obviously, this podcast only exists because of the people who support us on Patreon. So you can go to Patreon, Jarrod Kimber, and you can find your level and, whatever tier you want to support us on. You can get access to my writing as well, all sorts of things there, and one-on-one chats and Q&As and all these sorts of things. Plus, the Patreon subscribers get to ask the first question on this chat. And today, that starts with Christopher, who says, could England have decided to have Josh Butler as captain in the World Cup? Could if England had decided to have Josh Butler as World Cup, but have Morgan always be on the field and effectively captaining from the side and a different fielder just coming off for a couple of overs at a time? Oh, okay. So he's basically wondering if there's a law to stop another player, like a 12th man, from captaining in this particular case. It's a good question, Christopher. I think the bigger problem would be that after a certain point, the umpires would just send Owen Morgan off the field. If he was making clear decisions, I think the umpires would probably go over and have a word. Whether there's a clear law on this, there probably is, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. But there have been quite stringent laws on 12th men over the years. Things like in the old days they couldn't, wicket keep without permission. They couldn't field in close-in positions. All these sorts of different things have existed in the cricket laws. So I would assume there's something on captaincy. But off the top of my head, I don't know that one. But excellent question. Ramnath says, when Devon Conway was ignored by IPL teams during the auction this year, Simon Doull criticised IPL franchises preferring average Australian cricketers over first-rate New Zealand cricketers. Do you think there is merit in his argument that the IPL teams have an inherent bias towards picking more Australian cricketers? Yes. I mean, Ramnath, I think everyone at this stage probably believes that one way or another. I mean, I think on a very basic level, there are a lot of coaches who are Australian, and I think that is probably the most obvious reason that Australian players are overvalued. Also, I think that there was a natural thing that the Big Bash was the biggest tournament around quite often when the auction was on. So I think that players who had just played very well in the days or weeks prior quite often got hyped up because of the Big Bash. I think that for generations we have been led to believe that Australian cricketers are just genetically better than non-Australian cricketers, of which we're probably finding out is not quite as true these days. So I think all those biases play a part. I'm not sure that Devon Conway is an automatic, IPL player. Anyway, although he's obviously a fantastic talent and probably deserves to have a go. I think that the one thing I would say is the New Zealand domestic competition is obviously a lot more limited than the Big Bash. But having said that, I would say that, there are other competitions around the world as good, if not better, than the Big Bash. And there are tons of players getting picked from that. So I do think there is a bias there, and there kind of always has been, as far as I'm aware. Kumar says, I watched your exit interview videos, which are all up on YouTube, or all the teams that have exited at the time I'm recording this anyway. And he's asking about the one about RCB. Was that the home record for RCB is 50%, and apart from Chennai and Hyderabad, have recorded 50% record in away games. How does a team overcome such an obvious disadvantage at the home pitch being a batting paradise and short boundaries? Well, the thing is that if you're stacking your team up in that particular way, and it's a batting paradise, you have to work out what is the best way to make the most of your home conditions. If you know that is the case, and that's always been the thing about Bangalore, that they don't get an advantage from playing at home. But that's how you pick your team. If your wicket is turning sideways and you're picking four seamers, you're not going to get an advantage from home. So they have to work out whether that means they need more batters. I would suggest that over the years they've tried that. That hasn't worked. And I'd say maybe the opposite is true, that they should have been going out there and investing in bowlers who are very good on flat pitches, guys with good slower balls, guys with interchangeable skills, guys who could spin it both ways, whatever that may be. Bangalore haven't done that. They still don't have a very good overseas bowler. And, over the years, that's been a constant problem for them. So if you know what your local conditions do, you have to play to that, and that's something that it's almost. I think the first thing that I do when I get involved with a franchise is look to shore up the local players. But the second thing I do is, okay, what's the pitch going to do? And if it's going to do this, how do we build an attack around this so that we don't, or a strategy around this so we don't lose? I feel like Bangalore's never done that. Ian says, with English cricket agreeing with the counties to go back to 2 divisions for 2022 and for the foreseeable future, how much does this seem like kicking the can down the road in terms of reforming the English structure? I appreciate the argument. Oh, what's he saying here? I appreciate the argument against the conferences as Division 2 and 3 were uncompetitive. But I think a system where you crown champions after a season where you play some teams once and others, yeah, I certainly get what you're saying there, Ian. I think that 2 divisions makes perfect sense for county cricket. Is probably the short answer there. I realized I got the wrong headphones on, So I completely understand why that is the case and how that is happening and what they're looking at doing there. I think the days of thinking that first-class cricket has to be completely fair and a proper competition on its own are probably gone. So realistically, what England should be looking at doing is maximising their international players from here on in. That's not to say that people won't still go and watch county cricket, because I think they will, but it's not fair. It's not an equitable system. It's really there to pick your best players for the England team. And so, if you were to play a first-class season properly, and county season is almost the only one that does, you would have multiple divisions. Then you would have a proper series for your final. We don't do that. The Shield doesn't do that. No one really does that. So we're not really trying to find out who the best team is in any of these first-class series, really. We're just trying to basically, get through the year. It's very hard to work those things out anyway, but it's a very interesting question. Thank you to everyone on Patreon. I see that... Oh, no, I was going to say the green room's been glitchy, but it's been less glitchy than usual. Let's have a look. It's been just as glitchy as usual. Fantastic. Bhaskar? Keshuv?
Hi, Jarrod. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me just put my headphones in properly so I don't get you on every single device I have.
Hi, Jarrod.
But yeah, go ahead. Ask your question.
Yeah. So my question is, can cricket have the kind of point system that we have seen in football leagues? Like, there's no final, just the team which ends up on the top of the charts at the end of league stage is crowned as the winner. Can we see that, if not in World Cups, but at least maybe in a World Test Championship? Can we see that in cricket in future?
We already had that and we didn't like it. That was the system before, wasn't it? I mean, we've only had one final for the rest of the history of Test cricket. Whoever's been number one, since we've been talking about teams who've been number one, it's been from the most wins. No one seemed to particularly like that. So I don't think it works. I also don't think it particularly works in a sport where home advantage is so massive. I think that you should probably have to win a final in a neutral space. When it comes to Test cricket, certainly when it comes to ODI cricket and T20 cricket, I just don't think you'd be able to play enough games to ever do that. So no, it's not for me that particular idea. Although I can understand why you might think that, but yeah, that is the system that we used to have.
Yeah, I mean, I thought since in WTC every team is not playing everyone, and especially the last time the system was so flawed, people were literally cribbing about it. Especially when India was, not yet in contention to play the final. So I thought maybe why not just crown the winner who ends the league stage at the topmost position.
Yeah, but that is what we've always done. we literally went away from that. So even if you do your system, teams aren't going to play everyone. India's still not going to play Pakistan, are they? right? So I can't see how that is any fairer. It's still going to be, you're still going to have, I don't know, New Zealand or South Africa or Australia in another, playing a bunch of teams that is easy for them to beat in one cycle. That's what the final is there for, to at least give us some sort of structure. It's not perfect, obviously. I mean, at the very least, we should probably have semi-finals. And there's certainly a lot more that can be done. But I think in the short term, if nothing else, then what we've managed to do with having this sort of a system is at least take it from the biased league structure and giving it some finals. But we're not really finding out who the best team is. That's not really the point. And I don't think we can do that in Test cricket because you'd need like a 6-year cycle.
Yeah, what do you think about the venue for the final? I mean, last time the first one happened at Lords, and I don't know where the next one is. So, is there a fair way to decide the venue? Can you reward the team finishing first in the league stage? Can they be the host, or maybe team finishing third can be the host for a neutral venue?
Yeah, I mean, something like that. I mean, they're going to do it in the UK because you get a crowd in the UK for neutral tests. That's why the UK gets to host so many things. Other places don't get crowds for those games and they look silly. It's going to be hard for them to play a World Test Championship in a place where they're not going to have any crowds. So I would say in the short term, it will continue to be played in England unless, someone else desperately wants it. And from what I can tell of what I've heard, no other boards have wanted it at the moment. But yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is a proper league. We don't even have a proper league, right? So you're talking about trying to work out who the best winner is, and New Zealand and don't even play a similar amount of games than Australia, India, and England or Sri Lanka might have to play, right? This is not a proper league. But thank you very much for your question.
Thank you.
All right. Something weird went on there. Who's the speaker? I believe. Basco, are you there? Basco, do you have mute on? Oh, I thought he was there. He sent a message saying he was there. Just loving the way this all works. Let me go with someone else here. Jacques, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, unmuted as well.
Perfect. What's your question?
My question is hypothetical for you about associate cricket. So I'm living in the Netherlands at the moment. I'm getting quite into associate cricket. If you were putting together an associate team, would you rather have a world-class fast bowler, so like 145 kilometers plus, or a world-class spin bowler who can bowl a higher proportion of your team's deliveries over a season or over a match?
I suppose if you compare it to what we saw with Afghanistan, they had a high quality 90 mile an hour bowler and he was barely ever fit. And, obviously he was a big point of difference when they had him. But when you get to the top level, having a 90 mile an hour bowler is not that special. So at the associate level, it's very special. But once you start to play better teams, it's not as much. In fact, I did a podcast with a Callum McLeod from Scotland, for Double Century podcast, and I was saying to him, how much of it is an advantage to you that when you played England in that game, the famous game at the Grange that they beat England, that you're just used to 90 mile an hour bowlers, like in a way that associate cricketers hadn't been before. So I don't think it's quite the same punch in the face that it used to be having a 90 mile an hour bowler. Although I will say this, the Netherlands did use their very quick bowlers to bounce out the UAE in the World Cup qualifiers. Although, to be fair, that was like UAE A team by that stage because half of them had been done for match fixing, sadly. But it's a very a slightly weird one on that. But I think with a spinner, they can just bowl a higher percentage of overs, can't they? I think as a general rule, you want seamers because seamers are more useful in both conditions, in let's say east and west conditions. And so, you have a look at Ravi Jadeja. On paper, he's probably the most important player in the world. He's probably not the most important player in the world, though, when you factor in how average he can be sometimes when he's playing away from home. Whereas a seam bowler is always going to have moments, even around the world, other than a few wickets. Like some of the Sri Lankan wickets and the odd Indian wicket where they don't get any help. So I don't know is my answer to that. It's a very good question. And I suppose it also depends. If you're based in Asian environments, then I think the spinner would be way more important. But if you're an island, you'd probably prefer to have the quick bowler, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I don't know. It's like, because I know the Netherlands, they did have this like super fast attack, and I know it worked in some ways and didn't work in others. And like Rashid Khan obviously is the great story for this kind of thing. So that's kind of really what got me thinking.
I mean, it's interesting when you look at Netherlands and Afghanistan, and if I can't see anyone else coming up requesting any chat, so if anyone else is trying to request, keep going. Hopefully they'll eventually pop up. But it is really interesting because essentially the Netherlands can't find any spinners outside of someone like Roelof van der Merwe, who's a in T20 cricket's fine, but obviously in the other formats of cricket is only going to get you so far. And then Afghanistan have basically lost their ability to find seamers after finding bunches of them, and now I have this army of spinners. And so I wonder if there's like these things just go in waves for associate cricketers at a certain point. And I mean, I think Scotland's really interesting. Having Mark Watt and Hamza Tahir in Scotland seems like a very random thing, but to have two left-arm finger spinners of that quality available to them. But on the other side of it is how often can Scotland play them both at home? So having them is not, maybe it's a development issue at a certain point where they can only really play them both in the same team when they're traveling, which might be handy for them in the World Cup, but not so much in other tournaments. But a great question, mate. Thank you very much.
That's not a problem. Can I ask a follow-up, actually, or a different question?
Sure.
Also about associate cricket. So, I mean, like one thing that I love about the Football World Cup is, you like have these kind of random teams a lot of the time from like countries that I've never heard of. Like I remember Honduras in the World Cup in 2010. And I think that the way, especially the T20 World Cup is structured with this like qualifying tournament and then for a qualifying tournament and then the knockout stages really loses something. And I've always thought that T20 really is the format to open up the game, smaller groups, like kind of worse countries. Like I think the trade-off of what's good for the game versus the drop in quality in some cases is worth it as a trade-off. But I was wondering what you thought about that, like having an expanded World Cup with more teams.
Well, it won't be a drop of quality because eventually you will get better teams from doing this. And we know this because this is why Sri Lanka is, a great team. And this is why other teams who've come in late, like Bangladesh and Zimbabwe, have improved so much by coming in and being a major team. Ireland, Afghanistan now as well. They all got their way by essentially going through those major tournaments. That's where they took their big jump. So it might be a short-term drop in quality, but I don't think it will be a long-term drop in quality. Also, the associate teams have never been better than they are. Even 10 years ago, the level of associate cricket was nowhere near the strength that it is right now. I mean, to think that Nepal has a player of, or two players in Paras Khadka and Sandeep Lamachane of their talent, and they didn't qualify for the qualifying event. So they didn't qualify for the qualifying event, if that makes sense. So if you're calling what we're about to see now a qualifying event, they didn't even qualify for the event before this because they lost to Singapore, right? Who basically rode about 4 or 5 really good players on the way through. So I think that shows how much the quality of it has changed. Well, I don't care if it's one-day cricket or T20 cricket. As far as I'm concerned, a World Cup is for the world. It is not just for the major nations. And cricket is, the reason we don't have as many major nations in cricket is because we didn't invite anyone. And we haven't gone out of our way to do that. Whether it be Ireland in America or Argentina or Denmark, we've lost out on so many quality teams throughout the history of cricket. And there's no reason to. Argentina absolutely love rugby, absolutely love football, and played cricket at a really high level. I would argue at least as high as the level that New Zealand did at the same time. And to lose a country like them, and if you go through, when you go through the, teams like Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, I'm trying to think some of the others, Ireland, Scotland, Denmark used to, roll a lot of those teams, right? Denmark beat an MCC team at one stage. I think that's right. Pretty sure that's right. Or if they didn't, they got very close. Denmark had a really good team. We've had strong teams from Europe before. We've had strong teams from other places before, and we haven't done anything with them. So if you can use the World Cup to move that forward, to help that, then I say that is definitely something we should be doing within cricket. And it doesn't make any sense to me. Also, it's embarrassing that we are starting a World Cup in Oman with a bunch of teams that aren't box office teams. I wrote this in 2016, and some of the associate teams got really angry. But I think the first ball was like, trying to think who the opening bowler was, but it was a Hong Kong bowler whose name I should remember, opening the bowling to Hamilton Madzakadska from Zimbabwe. And it's like, look, I'm not having a go at those players, but that's not how you open a World Cup. You open a World Cup by, Jasprit Bumrah bowling to, David Warner, right? You open it with a bang. And there were no crowds in those games because the Indians didn't even know if the tournament had really started yet, right? And now we're playing it in Oman, so it's even going to be further away. Although I've just talked to Paul Radley for another podcast, and he thinks that they will get good crowds in Oman, which would be great. Let's bring them in properly. Let's work out a proper way. If we're worried that they're going to be bad, schedule 2 games a day. So there's always another game for you to be able to watch. So there's always one game with an associate in it. Maybe there's another game without associate nations in it. There's ways of doing this, and cricket hasn't come up with them yet. And so we end up with this sort of silly system. But thanks so much for your questions, mate.
Thanks.
All right. I think Basker couldn't get his question up on the voice thing, but he's written it through. He says, my question is regarding leg spinners and their speed. With the growing preference of fast leg spinners, case in point selecting Rahul Chahar over Yuzi Chahal, historically Kumble, Freedy, most successful ODI wicket takers. Rashid Khan is one of the best in T20s. So do you think slower leg spinners will go out of fashion, or do you think they still stand a chance in tests? I think that if you can spin the ball at speed and land it where you need to, I can't remember what the actual speed is, but the ECB did scientific tests on spin, and there is an optimal speed that spinners should bowl, and my memory is that Rashid Khan is very close to it. He might even be slightly above it. And the reason they thought that was the optimal speed is that there's a speed at which you need... I'm trying to explain this scientifically, despite the fact I'm not very scientific, but there is a speed at which the ball needs to spin a distance further than it does when it's seaming or swinging, that you need to be able to go. And if you bowl too fast, it doesn't spin at that speed, and it ends up just skidding on. So think, I don't know, maybe someone like Ryan Harris, for instance, or Michael Yardley. Not Ryan Harris, Chris Harris. Ryan Harris did not skid the ball on as a spinner, but Chris Harris. So there is an optimal speed, which is around the Rashid Khan speed. However, Matt Parkinson is tearing people apart, and I think we will continue. And Nathan Lyon is not a quick spinner by any stretch of the imagination. So I would say that there are certainly slow spinners that are still successful. Whether I would assume, if you go back and have a look on YouTube at footage of Clary Grimmett bowl, I think you'll be astounded by how slow he is. Just an incredibly slow bowler. So we have clearly moved on a long way from him. And, I've seen little bits of footage of Aubrey Faulkner. He was a very slow leg spinner as well. I would say that we probably are just naturally getting quicker as we go. Shane Warne, I know he may not have looked like the most athletic person. Shane Warne was incredibly strong, especially through his chest and his shoulders and his arms. Aussie rules football. He had that, I was going to say disability when he was a child, but, injury when he was a child. He got very strong. I think that spinners are probably going to get quicker as time goes on, naturally. And the thing is that we know that there's sort of a natural top-end speed of spin, because when Tamal Mills or Anrik Nortje bowl back of the hand wrist spin, which is a slightly slower version of normal wrist spin because it's more like a wrong-in. But when those guys do that, they bowl around 105, 110 kilometers an hour. And there aren't that many people who bowl back of the hand slow ball much quicker than that. So we know that even if you're moving your arm over at 150 k's an hour, when you bowl spin, it's going to come out about 105, 110. So there's probably a natural limit there, unless bowlers get a lot faster. But it's a really interesting question. I think we'll probably see more faster spinners, but I don't think that means that the slower spinners will die out as well. It just means we might see fewer of them going forward. It's a really, really interesting topic, that one. Thanks for that one, Basco. Sorry that you couldn't come through. Samanth has come through. Sorry if it's being a bit glitchy, everyone, but yeah, keep requesting and hopefully I'll be able to see you. Samanth, are you there? You seem to... Oh, you muted yourself.
Hello, Jarrod.
Oh, there you are. How you doing? What's your question, mate? Very good.
I have a simple question. I'm not sure if it's worth the question, but so basically, RCB has been pushing AB de Villiers as a finisher this season, and I get that they need Maxwell to have good runs at score runs and good run rate in the middle overs. But for example, in the SRH match, Padikkal backed himself to anchor the innings and finish the innings, but they couldn't trust AB de Villiers to play out few spin overs instead of while Maxwell is batting. Rather, they would prefer a Kohli or Padikkal to anchor through the innings. Why wouldn't do you think they should rather trust AB de Villiers to play a few overs of spin? Rather than trusting on the whole anchoring thing and hoping Kohli and Padikkal would come off at the end, which they haven't been doing really since the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I think your question's a little bit twisted because it's not like they can tell Padikkal and Kohli to go out, right? So what you're kind of saying is, should they send Maxwell in a little? Should they send AB de Villiers in sometimes before Maxwell in certain situations? Is that right?
Yes, but also they could. They give clear instructions, right? How they want to play. I mean, Kohli has spoken so many times about fearless cricket, how he has to be expressive.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. I mean, I've said this before, probably on this very podcast, that so many... Oh, can you just mute yourself? Someone's doing the dishes in the background or throwing something at the wall. But, there we go. Thank you. So essentially, I don't know why this is, but Australia and India, I'm trying to think if there's anyone else, maybe South Africa, they just seem to tell all their batters to become anchors. The Rishabh Pant one absolutely does my head in. Why you would have a talent like Rishabh Pant and tell him to be an anchor? And we see it all the time. Even someone like Ashton Turner in Australia, it's like, just let him hit the ball for 6 a lot and run really hard twos. That's what he's really good at. You don't need him to bat at number 3 and average 35 with a strike rate of 130. You can find other people who can average slightly less than that with a similar strike rate. What you can't find is someone who can average 25 coming in at number 5 with a strike rate of 155, which Ashton Turner can do. So that's the first bit, the whole anchor thing, that Padikkal and Kohli, who both could certainly be much quicker than anchors if they wanted to be. The second part of this is that AB de Villiers, if he goes in earlier, will chew up balls, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way, but he will knock the ball around because he's not as suited to... I mean, he's fine with spinners, but he likes to be in for a little while before he scores with spinners. They have someone in their lineup who will literally attack from the first ball against spinners if he has to. And if anything, it's almost his speciality, although obviously once Maxwell's set, doesn't really matter what you bowl at him other than very, very fast stuff occasionally, but generally he can smash everything out the park. So what they're doing really is maximising their batting attack. The problem is that if Padikkal and Kohli are batting so slow, and you could add Bharat to that, I don't think any of them have particularly high strike rates. I did the RCB episode the other day, but I've forgotten all the numbers. But if that's the case, then I think there has to be someone else at the top. You need someone maybe like a Rahul Tripathi at the top who's going to go in and bang the ball around, or Prithvi Shaw, although everyone would like a Prithvi Shaw if at all possible. But you do need someone else to be able to do that, I think, at the top. Where the problem comes is I think they've got those 2 anchors who are if they're going to bat all the way through the innings, which quite often they are, that means that AB de Villiers is going to be coming in quite often too late anyway. So you're not really maximising the advantage. The other thing is that if they're still sending in a number 3, which they usually are, and that seems to be part of their thing, they're limiting the amount of balls that Maxwell can face and then limiting the amount of balls that AB can face. I've got no problem with AB coming in between the 8th and 12th over, but you can't guarantee that he will come in between those points in the game, right? And that's the biggest problem that we've had. And so when I was with St. Lucia, it's a slightly different situation because I think Kieran Pollard is much better against spin. But I was like, if he's our best bat, if he bats at 5 or 6, we might get he might average 30 with a strike rate of 160. But if he bats at 3 and 4 and comes in straight after the power play, we'll be able to. He can knock the spinners around until he wants to start hitting them for sixes. So I'm not saying that the RCB tactic is wrong. I just think that they probably, if they're going to do it, they can't have two guys who are going to strike it. I don't know what Padakal and Kohli ended up with this year, but I would assume their strike rates are about 125 off the top of my head. I don't think that is the best case scenario, I suppose, when you have this lineup. If you have someone as good as AB de Villiers at 5, who can average 35, probably batting there, can't you afford to have slightly more firecrackery players at the top? Now, they did try Washington Sundar earlier in the year, and he didn't come off. I still think he's a fantastic player, and I would have kept playing him. I think he didn't even go for runs when he was bowling that much. I don't know why he wasn't in the team at the end. But I think that, someone like him, or maybe a small, a different kind of pinch hitter, if you wanted to, or a specialist batter, and you just say to them, go in and smash it, would make more sense in that particular situation, because you kind of want AB de Villiers to bat at 4.5, if that makes sense. So in that, you really only want your player to take up 8 to 10 balls in every innings, batting at either opening or at number 3, and you want them to try and thrash them, almost a Sun on the Rhine type position. So I just think maybe they didn't get the overall tactics right there, but I've got no problems with AB de Villiers coming in at 5. I've got more of a problem with the fact that you've got guys like Kohli and Padakal who can clearly whack boundaries, and I would assume they're being told not to, or have decided not to.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Washington Sundar was injured, I think.
He was injured for the second part, but he was dropped at the start of the year. Do you remember? So he was definitely dropped the first time. But he has been injured as well. But no, he was definitely dropped. Have a look at his batting average. I think he averaged 7. And if you remember, Kohli wasn't even bowling him his overs. It's bizarre. The treatment of Washington Sundar at RCB has been bizarre. I still don't think they realise what an absolute talent they have there. But thank you very much for your question, mate. All right, who we got next? Devdut. Oh. Devdut, are you there?
Yep. Hey, Jarrod, before I ask my question, I just wanted to share. I listened to your podcast about Caribbean cricket and I absolutely loved it. So it was a great one.
Thank you.
Just coming to my question, I wanted to ask you about the PBL and Cricket Australia in particular, and how every year they introduce these new rules. And I live in Australia right now, and I see a lot of footy, and I don't see these weird rules in footy. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
We use that. Sorry, I was going to say they put them in the preseason tournaments in Australia, don't they? Whereas the BBL just tries them, and yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong there. Is it like, do Australians find T20 cricket boring? Is that why they are trying to kind of change it so much? Because I do think that there is a chance that some of the rules that they have introduced can be used in for future T20 games, like the X Factor. That is something really interesting. But what do you think about this in particular? Do you think something like this can be introduced in international cricket, T20 cricket in future? And just about Australia, why do they keep doing it in BBL, and why do they not keep it simple?
Yeah, I'll start with Australia. Basically, in one-day domestic cricket, they split the innings up at one stage. I don't know if you were around when that was happening. I don't know how old you are, but they split the innings up because they thought that would be more exciting. So you'd have 20 overs, then the other team would have 20 overs, then you'd have 25 overs or whatever it was. I can't even remember if it was a 50-over game still, but it was roughly a 50-over game. And it was maybe the biggest disaster I've ever seen, because teams started blocking out towards the end of their 20 overs, because who wants to lose a wicket before a break in cricket? Like, we're trained mentally not to do that. And I think eventually we would have got past it. But my big thinking then is the same as my big thinking now. How does that help anything? What were they trying to do in order to actually make more people come? Like, these changes, I've got no problem. If you're trying to make T20 cricket a better sport, I think you should make changes. And I think that, I think we've seen rule changes in the NBA this year that will change the sport to make it slightly better. We've seen things like that in cricket before. But there's this whole thing that these formats have to be continually fixed. It's like, well, if one-day cricket wasn't good, why is it still around, 60 years after it started? And if it's not good, why are you still flogging it as an international product, right? It's clearly still working. And the same with T20. I think that, and I'm pretty sure Trent Woodhill was involved with this, who's obviously a friend of mine, and he was involved in the 100 as well. I think at a certain point that Trent is trying to perfect the game, and the people who are running the game are trying to find gimmicks, and they're two different things, right? So I've got absolutely no problem with changes to T20 cricket. I've talked about this before. I think there are plenty of things that we could do in T20 cricket to make it more different than one-day cricket, and also to improve it as a sport. A lot of the things that they're doing are just TV gimmicks for the sake of being a TV gimmick, and I don't know if that actually ultimately improves the sport. You might fluke something. So, for instance, the three-point line in basketball is probably one of the most famous ones where that was a gimmick. And it's gone on to, I think, probably help the game of basketball, unclog the lane and allow more people to score in varied ways. Probably eventually it's helped short players as well in basketball, which is quite, handy. My problem is that that's not what all these changes were. And some of them were essentially so that one team could catch up or feel like they could catch up halfway through the game. That's an artificial metric. I mean, T20 cricket is already artificially made, so we have a lot of close endings. So I suppose when I look at things like that, I wonder how much the people who are involved, and I don't mean Trent so much, although Trent has his own issues with cricket, which I'm sure he'll talk about one day, but I think a lot of the changes that are made are people who already don't like cricket, and they're changing it. And the thing is that I don't think a casual fan's going to hear about X Factor and be any more interested. I just think that you keep putting on a good show, and you keep making sure international players are coming, and you keep developing your local talent, and you make small tweaks to make the sport better when you can. What the Big Bash did last year was just a bunch of gimmicks. I'm not saying some of them didn't work, and I'm not saying all of them didn't work. Some of them clearly did. But I've been saying for years about one-day cricket, we just keep changing it over and over again. Fielding restrictions and the amount of balls and, all these little things. And it's just like, maybe we should just leave these sports alone and work out if we can market them better and sell them better. And if there are different ways that we can do that. And I don't think that we do that in cricket enough. And instead, we go, we'll tweak this. I wrote something when the Big Bash happened. Who are these casual fans who are hearing this in the newspaper and go, now I'm going to watch? Now that they've brought in this really confusing thing with an X in its name, I can't wait to watch. I just don't believe that those things happen. When you make a fundamental change to the sport, so the sorts of things that I could see is you have 15 players on each T20 side and you have 10 batters and 5 bowlers. That would change the quality of the game and would change how the game fundamentally is played, and would take it towards more of an American-style sport rather than a non-American-style sport. That's also quite kind of cool. You know that every time someone is batting and bowling, the best batters are going up against the best bowlers, not facing Moses Enriquez. I hope that helps. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes. And just one more thing, as someone who's like you who's worked extensively in T20 cricket, what rule changes would you think would make the game better? Like we used to talk about declaring a batsman who is not playing well, or rather a batter who's not playing well, something on those grounds. Anything that you have
We
thought
can do
about
that now. To be fair, you can do that now. Teams just don't do it because they're terrified. Everyone's thinking about doing it, but they're terrified of it. I think the rule change, the playing condition change that I just said, have 15 players, no more of a minimum of 5 have to bowl, and a maximum of 10 have to bat, or 11 have to bat if you want. Would be one. Another one could be what you just talked about there. Instead of making batters retire out, what if we just said you can retire not out and you can just come back in later on? Because why they don't do it is, like, let's say you've lost 3 wickets and you've got your opener's still in and he's got a strike rate of 110. You don't want to retire him out and then have a collapse and have no batters left. Whereas if you can bring him back in later, maybe that would be less of a problem. But, you might, if he's tired or if he's just not hitting boundaries anymore, you might want to bring in someone with a bit more power for a couple of overs, or maybe even just for a matchup. You know, maybe you have your opener out there for the power play, and they and they smash the ball around for the power play, and then you sub out your two openers and you bring in your two spin hitters for a while, and then when the seamers come back on, you bring your seam bowlers back on. That makes it a really tactical game. The speed of which that can be done, maybe you can only have 2 subs a game or 3 subs a game or whatever, because the speed of which that can be done will be a problem. But there are many ways to make T20 cricket better, and that was my problem with what the Big Bash did. And it's also my problem with the 100 as well. This is something that I've talked about with Trent Woodhill directly, which is like, why not just in the 100, instead of making it 100 balls, just have 10 overs from one end and 10 overs from the other? Why are our fielders running from end to end, tiring themselves out because they're fielding from long on to long on? Right? If you've got a great fielder, you want them to spend all of their energy on literally chasing a ball and catching it. And at the moment, they're changing ends. And the 100 didn't even solve that problem. It kept it. It minimized it, but it's still there. So I don't understand these sorts of things. There are actual fixes that we can make that will make this sport good. And if these boards still want cool, we can still give it a cool name, whatever. It's not that hard. Just put X in front of it and they'll be really happy. But yeah, thank you very much for your question.
No worries. Thanks, Jarrod.
Cheers. I think I have... Oh, yeah. There is here. There's no one else lined up, which means probably a bunch of people have asked questions and it hasn't come through. So if anyone else is out there and wants to ask a question, feel free. There, you there?
Yeah, Jarrod, can you hear me?
Yeah. What's your question, mate?
Yeah, just to follow up from Devdutt's question. So you talked about subs being used. So do you see a situation where if subs are allowed, obviously, so you see a pinch hitter like Hardik Pandya who likes pace on the ball, just going out in the power play and hitting it and retiring these overs if he's not out or something like that. Just a follow-up question for ask.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about maximizing how good T20 cricket could be, wouldn't it be great if you could do that? And then the other team has the they just go, okay, well, Hardik said we'll just play all of our spinners. Let's see what he does now. Like that's the great thing about T20 cricket is there's you have to make those decisions. It would force them, but it would also mean that Hardik would be doing what he is best at, right? More often than not. And I think that is where I really want T20 cricket to go towards, which is players who are specialists in those positions doing what's best. I don't want Jai Richardson batting at 7, right? Why would I want to see that, right? Why would I want to see, Chris Jordan batted at 7 this season as well, didn't he? Why would I want to see that when we could have Carlos Brathwaite batting at 7, and we could have who else have we got? Darren Sammy at 8, and who's a really good spin hitter? George Munsey at 9, and you could have all these different players throughout your lineup in that case, and you could just have a couple of substitutions whenever you wanted to use them at a different time, and then you have the best players up against the best players. I think part of the problem with T20 cricket at the moment is we don't have that.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask, how much do you believe in the bowler theory where captains choose only one type of a bowler? So if a leg spinner is playing, they won't choose another leg spinner. Like if Yuvi is in the team for India, Rahul Chahar won't play because he's a leg spinner. So how much do you believe in that? Like if a left arm spinner is bowling, like India have Jadeja, who's going to bowl at the World Cup for them. Why not pick Akshay? Because he is in great form right now. He is picking up wickets. So how much do you believe in that theory of captains trying to go in with just one kind of a bowler who does one job and they won't pick the other, even if he's good, or even if it brings variation? Like Chahal bowls those slow leg spins and Chahar bowls fast leg spins. So there's a variation there in itself.
Yeah, I suppose what they don't want is to go up against a team that has a bunch of left-handers and everyone hits them over deep mid-wicket every ball, right? So teams have gone match-up mad, I would say. And they don't always look at what their bowlers can do. They sometimes just go, wow, this team's got 5 left-handers, we can't bowl a leg spinner. Look, it's always been the case. I find the whole thing bizarre. The minute Pakistan got more than like one left-arm seam bowler, people started going, maybe they've got too many left-arm seam bowlers. I mean, we've seen teams go in with like 4 right-arm seam bowlers before, right? It's bizarre that when it's not a right-arm seam bowler, we think you can only have one of this. But if it is a right-arm seam bowler, you can have 4 or 5 of them. It's a really, really odd way of looking at cricket. I would say with the wrist spinners, it really does depend probably on the matchups against the opposition. We've seen, I mean, Afghanistan could go in with Afghanistan could go in with 2 wrist spinners or 4 wrist spinners, 2 leggies and 2 left arm wrist spinners if they wanted to. And they quite often on pitches that suit them, they do pick 3 and 4 spinners, don't they? And they do it regularly, and they don't have a problem with that. I think that where it becomes a problem is when the conditions aren't massively in favour of spin, and also it can be a problem at the death, especially if there is someone left at the crease, especially a set batter. That's when it gets really messy for spinners at the death. There's no reason why you can't pick 2 leg spinners. I worked for Melbourne Stars, and we had Adam Zampa and Sandeep Lamachani, and I think even when Sandeep went away, I think we picked another local leg spinner for a few games as well. There's no reason why you can't have 2 leg spinners or 3 left arm spinners. The left arm finger spinners that you're talking about, that is, I think, a problem if you go up against a team of left-handers. Unless Akshar or Ravi is incredible against left-handers, and I'd have to check their numbers, but I wouldn't think they would be. But unless they have that brilliant record against left-handers, like, say, someone like Mitchell Santner does, I really wouldn't want to go into a T20 game with 2 of them. That is a problem only because they can only spin it in one direction. But leg spinners, less worried about that because they can spin it in both directions.
Thank you so much, Jarrod.
No worries. I don't have any more questions coming through. Oh, wait, actually, Keshav can have the last one. Keshav, you there? Last question?
Yeah. So it's just about this final today. We have got 2 very different captains reaching the final. Of course, both of them have won World Cups, but with Dhoni, it's very instinctive sort of captaincy where the coach doesn't really interfere much. It's a captain-driven team. And then with Morgan, we have very analysis-based team. Nathan Lehman working with him very closely at England as well. So, do you think the future belongs to this sort of analysis-based captaincy, especially in T20s, or with Dhoni still having this sort of success? So it's to each his own, probably. What's the future like?
Well, here's one thing I'm going to tell you that I think they're very similar captains. In fact, I think they're extraordinarily similar captains in that they are both very level-headed people and they're both incredible pragmatists. And what they both try and do is put things in their advantage. And I think the difference is that Dhoni probably keeps more of that information in his head, and Morgan likes to know that he's dotted the I's and crossed the T's. I actually think they're incredibly similar captains, which other people probably wouldn't think of. But if you look at the treatment of some of Dhoni's bowlers over the years and look at the treatment of Moeen Ali and Liam Plunkett under Owen Morgan, I think you'll find that they're very, very similar. What you're really talking about is the way that they implement that on the at the top level. You're always going to have people who are going to listen to more analysis and other people who pick it up naturally. I mean, Dhoni doesn't have to do what Owen Morgan does because Dhoni's a different person, and also Dhoni picks up a lot of that stuff naturally, right? It's he has an eye that allows him to pick up those sorts of things and build relationships with bowlers, and he finds jobs for bowlers with teams. Owen Morgan does the same thing. The difference is that Owen Morgan talks to coaches and analysts more. It's the same thing. It's just a slightly different method. We're certainly going to have those kinds of leaders going forward. I think that if you had another captain like Dhoni, they would be allowed to do it. But realistically, unless you have the level of success that Dhoni is having, it would be silly not to get all that other information involved. If you're losing, people are going to say, well, why weren't you listening to the analyst? Why weren't you listening to the coach? Why isn't this? Why do you think you know everything? And there have probably been times where Dhoni has got things wrong because he hasn't listened to the analyst enough or the coach enough or, even other players in his team. So I really don't think they're that much different as captains. I think they have slightly different work methods to get to the similar results. and they basically they both like role players. They both try and put things slightly in their advantage every time they can, and they're both very calm. They're different kinds of people and different kinds of leaders, but in some ways, very similar kinds of captains. It's just that one does homework and the other one is maybe a more naturally gifted student, if that makes sense.
Just last point to follow up with Dhoni. He's also captaining in his 300th T20 game today. What do you attribute his longevity to? I mean, see, there are a few records in cricket which we think probably might never be broken, like, Tendulkar playing 200 tests or Dhoni captaining in 300 T20s. So what do you attribute his longevity as a captain to?
I don't know if Dhoni's record of that many captaincies won't be broken. I mean, how old's Kieran Pollard? If Kieran Pollard plays until his 40s, he might go past him. What's his longevity down to? Well, I mean, he's obviously a very naturally gifted athlete. I think that is it makes sense. He's also, like a lot of older players, they get to a point where they're very good. Chris Gale's done this as well, of basically limiting their weaknesses. So they don't do things. A lot of younger players, the reason they don't make as many runs as they should is because they almost don't. They don't want to believe that they can't do everything, so they keep trying to do everything. Whereas in truth, that's basically impossible. The older you get, sometimes you're just brilliant at, I can't face left arm seamers. So what I'm going to do is every time I'm on strike to a left arm seamer, I'm just going to try and steal a single. And so they get to that sort of level of their career. So Dhoni, being a smart cricketer, and as I said, Gale is certainly another one that I've noticed a similar pattern to. They basically work out what they can't do, and they get off strike for that, and they wait to be on strike for what they can do. But yeah, the athleticism. I mean, he's never been built like someone who looks like he's that athletic, but I think we know that he's got a lot of, natural athleticism to him. So his body hasn't aged the way that maybe someone without that sort of level of athleticism would have. He also clearly still wants to play, whether it's a financial thing or he just likes the gameplay of cricket or he just loves the sport or just loves Chennai, whatever it is. He clearly loves to play the game. Not all cricketers do. And so certain cricketers get into their, early 30s and they start thinking, what's next? I don't think that we've seen that necessarily with Dhoni. And he's an above average talent.
Longevity, not just as a player or an athlete, but also captaincy, because, there's a common saying that every captain has a shelf life and then their ideas get old and then you have to move on. But he has never moved on.
I mean, that's a nonsense theory, if we're being honest. That's for limited captains who don't have a lot of ideas. That's not the case if you're a proper captain and you're growing with the game. And Dhoni has certainly always been one of those players. I find that impossible to think that if you're a captain who is evolving with the sport that you're playing, that you would have a shelf life when it comes to strategy. It doesn't make any sense to me. You might have a shelf life in terms of you might not be able to make as many emotional speeches after a few years if your teammates have heard them all. That happens. We see that in coaching a lot. You might have a shelf life in that, oh, God, can't I just bat today? Can't I just keep? Do I have to do that? But if you actually enjoy captaincy and you enjoy all the things that come with it and you're evolving with the game, then you'll be a captain as long as you want to be. I mean, generally, you would have thought older people would have been better captains anyway because they've seen more situations and they probably have more natural empathy. And as you become a father, you understand, younger players better and all these sorts of things that happen to you. So, yeah, if you're good at that job, whether it be him or I suppose Graham Smith's another perfect example of someone who did it forever. Alan Border's another one. At a certain point to them, captaincy is no different than playing cricket, right? It's the players who see it as an extra chore or see it as hard work that probably want to give it up. And that makes sense as well. I can certainly see that. So, no, I don't see that as something. I mean, that's nothing there is to say that MS Dhoni is not remarkable in his own way, because I think he's certainly, he's obviously phenomenally talented batter, bowler, bowler, well, occasional bowler, but batter, wicketkeeper, and captain. And, above average talents, of which he's been a way above average talent, in all of those metrics, really. Why would he want to give them up while he's doing them well? Unless he's just not enjoying it, I mean, Brendan McCullum, I think, gave up the gloves partly because I don't think he enjoyed wicket keeping as much as he did batting, and also thought he could get more out of his batting by not wicket keeping anymore. You know, so you could see a similar situation where McCullum might be like, where Dhoni might go, do you know what? The last couple of years, I don't want to focus on wicket keeping or captaincy. I just want to bat and do one of the others, which is very possible. But thank you so much to everyone who sent your questions in on Patreon. Remember, you can support us on Patreon by going to Patreon Jarrod Kimber, and there's all the different tiers there. Thank you very much to Manscaped. If you would like to shave your testicles in a safer way, Manscaped is the place for you. Put the code REDINKER in and get 20% off worldwide and free worldwide shipping. Thanks to Bodyline T-shirts, and thank you to everyone who turned up in the Spotify Green Room, especially as it is glitchier than normal. We've got a couple of good podcasts coming up for the World Cup and a bunch of videos if you're going to YouTube. So, stay tuned, as they say. Thanks for listening.